COVID mandates, the January 6th Commission, and the infrastructure bill. I'm Heather Godwin, and this is the Square Circle. Hello, and welcome to the Square Circle. I'm your host, Heather Godwin. Joining us today are libertarian Doug Bandow, Senior Fellow at the Cato Institute. Hi, Doug. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to be on.
Conservative columnist Quin Hillyer of the Washington Examiner. Welcome, Quin.
Thanks, Heather. Glad to be on with you.
And progressive political journalist James Rosen. Welcome, James.
Welcome.
Welcome, everyone. This week, we saw new state mandates for public and private sector workers to get vaccinated, plus new guidance from the CDC on mask wearing. For combating the Delta variant of COVID-19, here's CBS News coverage.
Major reversal by the CDC. It now recommends that all Americans wear masks indoors where COVID is surging, fueled by the Delta variant. The CDC's guidance affects about 60% of U.S. counties where there are substantial or high transmission rates. CBS News has also learned that all White House employees, regardless of their vaccination status, are now required to wear masks indoors. And as the new school year approaches, the CDC is also recommending all students, teachers, and staff wear masks.
Quin Hillyer of the Washington Examiner. Does the CDC have the credibility at this point to deliver this message?
No, the CDC has lost credibility because they keep stepping all over their own message and messages, plural, and contradicting themselves. And nobody can make heads or tails of it. And what they said about 10 days ago is completely at variance with what they're saying now. And if you get a vaccination, and that's supposed to make you safe, and it's also supposed to make it hard to spread it, then why should vaccinated people wear masks? Now, to me, being asked to wear a mask is not that big a deal. It's not a lockdown. It's not some major imposition. But a lot of people, for some reason, freak out either way on pro or anti-mask. And as a sort of a threshold, by which you're saying you're either having the government tell you what to do or not tell you what to do, a lot of people see the mask as a threshold. And with the CDC saying, oh, you should get vaccinated, and then turning around and saying vaccination doesn't help and you need to wear a mask makes no sense.
Doug, how would you like to respond to that?
Well, the CDC does have a problem. I mean, last year it told us not to wear masks because it was concerned about people taking masks in short supply that needed to go to healthcare workers, and then said we should. And Quin is absolutely right. We were told correctly. I mean, I believe in vaccination, that we needed to be vaccinated and that would be the solution. And then, now we have to wear masks. To my mind, the issue here is vaccination and the question of not requiring people to wear masks, but frankly, requiring people to have a vaccination if they want to go to school. I mean, I think that businesses, churches, schools, and others should make the decision. My church has both online services and in-person services. I'd be perfectly happy if they announced that if you want to come to services at the sanctuary, have a vaccination, otherwise we welcome you online. So I'd look for other alternatives here. How do we create a better incentive to get people vaccinated? That really is the answer. We need to get these people, who for whatever reason, conspiracy or whatever, are against it. This is, to me, the crisis. Going after the masks is simply not going to solve that problem.
James, what do you think?
I think it's time to stop pussyfooting around. 80 million Americans roughly have not gotten vaccinated. It's no longer a case of the vaccine not being available. It's readily available. They've chosen not to get vaccinated. I frankly don't care why they've chosen not to get vaccinated, but they are the problem. And I think that out of a lack of courage, and because of political correctness, President Biden has refused to require vaccine passports. I think it's time to require vaccine passports. We're dealing with too many people who are endangering other people, including children, and they've had enough time to get their act together. That's the problem. And the CDC is trying to solve a problem from the back end. I would require vaccine passports, and then the people who have chosen not to get vaccinated, they will get vaccinated, because otherwise they will not be able to go out to restaurants. Their kids won't be able to go to school. They will be locked down. And I think it's time to do that.
Quinn, how do you think people will react in your state of Alabama that you're in if they're required to have a vaccine passport?
Well, they can't, because the legislature passed and the governor signed into law what I consider a very stupid bill, which makes it illegal for even a private business to ask for a vaccine passport. Now, there's a difference between the government mandating a vaccine passport and the government telling a private business that for their own protection or the protection of their workers or their customers, they can't ask for one. And this state and a lot of other states have literally made it illegal for private businesses to decide who and when they want to serve. And this is as much of a big government imposition telling people you can't require it as it would be for government to say businesses cannot open unless they have one. But anyway, right now, people in Alabama are dead set against a vaccine passport, just like they are in a lot of southern and western states, and it really doesn't make any sense.
Do either of you want to respond to that for a final word?
No, I think that's absolutely right. And the question is how to get over that. That is the crisis, that people need to be vaccinated. Vaccines work. And to my mind, that's where we have to concentrate. And at least we've started to get some conservative leaders and conservative journalists who had been at least doubtful or silent or talking on this. I think that has to be a major effort for anyone who wants to see us finally get over this. And the message has to be, if you don't want to have pressure on masks and closures, get vaccinated, because as long as we have a pandemic, these pressures are going to be there.
The federal government and President Biden have the constitutional right to ensure public safety. I think President Biden should issue an executive order, let it go up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will take it up quickly. And if the Supreme Court wants to rule against vaccine passports, then so be it. But something has to be done.
Well, it's clear this is going to be with us for a while. Also this week, the January 6th Commission held its first hearings. Here's part of the testimony of U.S. Capitol Police Officer Michael Fanone.
My body camera captured the violence of the crowd directed toward me during those very frightening moments. It's an important part of the record for this committee's investigation, for the country's understanding of how I was assaulted and nearly killed as the mob attacked the Capitol that day. And I hope that everyone will be able to watch it. The portions of the video I've seen remain extremely painful for me to watch at times, but it is essential that everyone understands what really happened that tragic day.
James Rosen, progressive political journalist. Do you think that will have touched any of the Republicans who are so adamantly against any type of review?
Well, I mean, there's, I don't know, 150 million Republicans in the country. It will surely touch some of them. But I heard the recording of a phone message that was left for Officer Phelan, I believe his name is, that was the most vulgar, scary phone message I think I've ever heard in my life, in which the caller threatened him. Officer Phelan was one of the officers who testified. He's no liberal. He's, from all accounts, he's conservative. I think he's a lifelong Republican. And this caller called him every name in the book, was unbelievably profane, threatened him and his family, said that the caller wished he was dead. It was exactly the sort of person who stormed the Capitol. And as long as Republican leaders in Congress and elsewhere and in the states refuse to acknowledge that this was an unconstitutional insurrection, most Republicans will not be swayed by. They may not have a response that's as extreme as this really sick caller, but most of them will not be swayed by this hearing.
Quinn, what do you think it's going to take for Republicans to gain some sympathy?
I'm not sure. I don't know where they lost their moral compass. But if this had been a pro-democratic crowd that stormed the Capitol, and you completely, switched the party affiliations, but other than that, everything was the same. Every single Republican on Capitol Hill would have spent hours every single day running to the nearest microphone to demand not just an investigation, but to demand that heads figuratively roll, that people go to jail, that the people on the other side in Congress go to jail. And I'm not saying that there are congressmen that should go to jail, but I guarantee you Republicans would be saying Democratic congressmen should go to jail for instigating this riot. If the shoe were on the other foot, that is how they would react, because this was an absolutely vile, vicious insurrection. It was an attempt to stop a very key process of our Constitution. And it was violent. It was hideous. It was scary. This is the people's house, and it was absolutely vilely attacked. And I am absolutely sick that my fellow Republicans in Congress are acting as if this is nothing to see here, move along.
And just to quickly add to what Quinn said, just remember the Benghazi hearings that went on month after month after month after month. That was a small United States embassy. I don't remember if it was an embassy or consulate. It was a very small United States installation in a foreign country. It wasn't the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., the center of the government. And it was radical jihadists who stormed it, not Americans. And despite that, Republicans in Congress held dozens of hearings and raged for months, blaming it on who? Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. So yes, Quinn's absolutely right.
Doug, I'd love to hear your point of view.
No, Quinn is absolutely right. I mean, this was an outrage, and there's no comparability. There were issues with the BLM protests and stuff, but none of that affected American democracy. The foundation of the American Republic is the peaceful transfer of power. And this was an attempt to prevent that. I mean, it's shocking. And anyone watching this, people were using an American flag staff to attack officers. I mean, they were going into the Capitol saying, hang Pence, the vice president. They were searching for Nancy Pelosi. When the mind boggles at what would have happened had they found these people and they came close. And the Republican behavior is beyond contempt. I mean, at the time, some of the Republicans seemed to think there was a problem, but of course, none of them will say anything today. I mean, this is a caucus that has completely lost any moral courage, that it spends its entire time kind of cowering in fear of a tweet or something, since he can't tweet, of Donald Trump, that attacks the few members of the caucus who have integrity. I mean, Kinzinger and Cheney, who were on this committee, and there were 8 others who did vote for impeachment. I mean, to me, it's extraordinary. And politicians are politicians, but this goes well beyond that. I mean, this is a fundamental attack on the American democratic system. And Quinn is absolutely right. If you flip this around, we can imagine the rhetoric, the press conferences, the demands, the sanctimony, the hypocrisy that would all be there. And I am shocked. And I don't know how you save the Republican Party if this is the way it responds to an attack on the system under which they are elected. I think it's frightening.
And Heather, I don't even think it's smart politically. I mean, yes, they're afraid of we know who, which I think at this point, you can imagine what the midterm election campaign ads by the Democrats will show. They'll show the rioters, as Doug said, and as Quinn said, striking police and saying just awful things, horrible things, traitorous things. Then they'll show Kevin McCarthy right after the attack, condemning it, and other Republican leaders. And then they'll show the vote rejecting the commission and statements saying it was just a tourist visit and it was peaceful and all that. And they'll show those ads over and over and over and over again. And I think it's going to really hurt the Republicans in the midterm election.
I learned that the funding for the insurrection was 100% legal, and it was all through super PACs such as Stop the Steal. I'd love to hear comments on that.
I don't know anything about funding the insurrection. If you're talking about funding the rally that turned into an insurrection, yeah, this was a clearly ginned up thing. I wrote a column 2 days before this rally that turned into an insurrection, warning of violence, saying every single part of the federal government should be on full alert because there were all sorts of rumblings of violence about to take place. Now, I didn't expect an actual attack on the Capitol, but I expected a full-on effort to have a violent demonstration from the pro-Trump right. And I wrote it. Anybody that was paying really close attention would have seen it was at least a possibility. And frankly, the president bears responsibility for it because it was his PAC that did at least fund the rally itself.
Well, it'll be interesting to see where this commission leads us. And finally, the Senate advanced President Biden's infrastructure bill. Here's the story from MSNBC.
The Senate voted to begin debate on a nearly $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure package by a vote of 67 to 32, exactly 1 week after it failed to pass. It marks a rare example of bipartisanship in Washington. 17 Republicans, including their leader, Mitch McConnell, joined all 50 Democrats in advancing the bill. It's the first step in a series of votes toward final passage of the agreement.
Doug Bandow, this question is for you. Is this a triumph or trouble?
Well, it's certainly a political triumph. It's not all done yet. I mean, we're still dealing with the Senate. I mean, who knows what can happen down the road. There are going to be more votes. And, where you have a very thin Democratic margin, where you have some Democratic moderates who are not willing to go along with what more progressive members want, even in the House. I mean, you have some of these same fissures that where the Democrats have about a 5-vote margin. They can't afford to lose very much. So it's not a done deal. It's certainly from the standpoint of the president, for him to have something to say, here's my bipartisanship, and to have a vote, I think it was 67 votes, in favor, as opposed to a 50-50 broken by, the vice president or something. I think that is a major step forward. Now, the challenge, of course, is almost everyone understands we need infrastructure. The problem is bills like this typically don't necessarily choose the right projects. Members go along because stuff's going to go to their districts. So, a Mitch McConnell voted for this bill. My guess is he's expecting some money to float down to Kentucky that he can point to. So the problem here is it's not at all clear that we're going to get the best projects out of this. And again, what else comes along? There's going to be a fight over another, the human capital infrastructure bill. We'll see where that goes. That Sinema has said she's against it. That could kill it. That's going to be another fight. But from the standpoint of a president who hasn't had a lot of his initiatives go forward, other than the initial stimulus bill, I think the Biden White House has to be pleased at that picture, that he has finally seemed to have brought together Republicans and Democrats. And I assume that from the Republican standpoint, that gives them at least something to point to argue they're not just for no. In fact, they are for something, prepared to work with the president.
James, your response?
Well, it seems like 1,000 years ago, but then candidate Trump in 2015 and 2016 campaigned strongly for major infrastructure spending. And of course, as long as Trump was saying it, a lot of other Republicans in Congress and out of Congress supported it. But then he got to Washington and he found out that most Republicans didn't want another big government spending legislation program, and so he stopped talking about it. But everybody knows that President Trump was supposed to make America great again. I mean, compared with any, I've traveled in other first world countries, and our infrastructure is way behind. Forget about Germany and France and England. Go to Japan, go to the urban parts of China, go to Singapore, lots of other countries. We have a lot of catching up to do, and it's only kind of political ideology that's preventing this from happening.
Quinn, do you see a negative in this at all?
Yes, this so-called infrastructure bill is, we believe, less than 25% bricks and mortar. We don't know because we still haven't actually seen the text of the bill, and it is obscene that they voted to advance to debate on a bill when they don't even have the bill published. But every other version of it, the actual infrastructure part of it, that what most people think of as infrastructure, roads, bridges, and the like, was way less than 25% of it. This is a boondoggle in and of itself. Even worse, Nancy Pelosi has again repeated, I think as late as today, that she will not take up the infrastructure bill unless the Senate has already passed at least a budget that will set up a reconciliation package that allows for this $3.5 trillion human capital, or whatever they want to call it, bill. If that is the deal, every single Republican in the Senate should say no dice on infrastructure, because we're not going to let Nancy Pelosi hold us hostage to this other $3.5 trillion boondoggle. So it's bad in and of itself because it's not real bricks and mortar. And it's really bad in that it is combined, in effect, by Nancy Pelosi with this other absolute monstrosity when we already are approaching 130%. Debt is approaching 130% of the gross domestic product, which is an extremely dangerous economic situation.
Doug, are you worried about the price tag on this?
Oh, yes. I mean, we passed a massive stimulus bill where the economy was starting to recover. A lot of the money went to higher income people who hadn't lost during the pandemic. Our debt totals were back up essentially in the early 1950s, coming out of World War II. We've hit the record. The Congressional Budget Office figures that by 2050 we could easily be at 200%. I mean, Greece, went into its crisis at about 143%. The challenge here is at some point people stop believing we can service the debt, then the interest payments go up. Right now, the Fed borrows essentially almost free. If that starts going upward, you start looking at financial crisis. And the problem is nobody wants to cut anything. I mean, they always go after domestic discretionary spending. That's about 15% of the budget. If you want to cut the budget, you've got 5 places to go: Social Security and Medicare. And boy, the elderly aren't going to want to cut that. Medicaid, well, you can't cut that if you actually want to give health care to poor people. Military spending, well, hawks don't want to do that. And interest payments, which you can't cut unless you repudiate the debt. We're facing an extraordinary financial future. So the more you pile money on today, the debt's going to go up, interest payments go up, and I really do fear for the future.
All right, so now let's take some questions from our viewers. Arlene Clark has asked, what positive results do you think will come out of the January 6th commission? Who would like to take that?
Well, I hope it'll give us more clarity as to what happened, and especially the responsibility of Republicans, what they were saying, what they were doing. People like Mo Brooks and others who, now the report is he was wearing body armor. I don't know if that's true, but if it is, it raises some questions as to what he was expecting. I'd like, and there are people I'd like to have testify what the president said to them. What did they say to the president? We need to know more what he did. I mean, he's saying, oh, these are all very wonderful people. Well, he was out there inciting it.
I don't know what is going to come of this. What should have happened is the commission modeled after the 9/11 commission, which was killed by Mitch McConnell in the Senate, the bipartisan equal member commission, because there are all sorts of questions that need to be asked, especially about the response once the riots started. There were hours that went by before the president called in help, even when McCarthy and others repeatedly were begging him for help. Reportedly, we need to know exactly what happened in the White House, not just to say, oh, Trump is bad, but to find out what the procedures are and what happens in the future if something like this happens again and the president, instead of being obstinate, is otherwise incapacitated. Who can step in and call in the National Guard? We need to figure these things out, not just to point fingers, but to protect against some sort of future terrible eventuality.
James, any positive results you think coming from this?
I don't think so. I hate to say it. I can predict that the committee will issue subpoenas, and some of the most important people who've refused to accept responsibility will refuse to answer those subpoenas. They will not appear, or they will come and make a big show of, taking the fifth, or saying, trying to make a mockery of the proceedings, and we'll kind of be right back where we started, where the people who support Trump and the people who support the insurrection, I'm sad to say, will just say this was a political stunt, and we won't have moved forward. I think if there had been a commission like the 9/11 commission, as Quinn and Doug say, with true bipartisan buy-in, it would have been a better result, but it's not going to happen with this committee.
Well, only time will tell. All right, and from Percy Adkins. Percy, thank you for writing in. What are some COVID restrictions that you think are ridiculous? Jump in.
Let me jump in. I think it is absolutely ridiculous for the mayor of Washington, D.C. To put in a new mask mandate applying not just to public workers, not just to public safety people or hospital workers, but for all indoor spaces, even for people who are vaccinated. If you want to get the message out that people need to get vaccinated, then you don't turn around and tell the vaccinated that even though they've done it, they still have to wear masks. It makes no sense scientifically. It makes no sense from a PR standpoint. It makes no sense from the standpoint of public health, because public health, you want to encourage vaccination, and this discourages it.
Doug, I see you shaking your head.
I agree with Quinn. I think he's right on that. That's a good example.
Now it's time for the most underreported story of the week. Who would like to go first?
Well, I'll jump in. Nobody else did. This is not an underreported story, except that the most important part of it is underreported. Everybody who's paying attention knows there's a big national debate over something called critical race theory, and more broadly, anti-racism training. And the establishment media is falling all over itself to say, oh, well, you just don't want to teach children that, that racism is bad, or that slavery existed, or whatever. And then they try to define away critical race theory. Here is the underreported story. It is the lawsuit out of Evanston, Illinois, which actually takes the actual text of the instructions sent out from a school system, mandatory instructions to their teachers, saying exactly what they need to teach in this anti-racism bunk. And it is deliberately telling them to teach the students that the nuclear family is bad and that the constitutional order should be questioned and undermined. Literally, in those words, that is the underreported story, what these anti-racism trainings really actually are. And they're sickening, and that's why they need to be stopped.
Well, my story is halfway around the world. The Taliban have shown up in China. They're talking to China. Now, that has some people concerned, and my argument is that actually is a very good thing. We are finally turning back to the countries that should be concerned about Central Asia, that now Russia and China and Pakistan and India all get to worry about all the problems of Central Asia, of insurgency, of the question of terrorism and everything else. We should not have been doing that for the past 20 years. Let them have this. I think they're going to be rather upset about it, but they're going to have to work to create stability there. Offload it from us. That, in my mind, is very good news, and it should be recognized as such.
Thank you. James?
I think the most underreported story is that a lot of conservative pundits, opinion leaders, and even some members of Congress, I get, I don't know, a dozen emails a day about this, continue to say that Joe Biden is a communist. He's pushing communism, and so on and so forth. And I've covered Joe Biden for, 27 years. The notion that Joe Biden is a communist is just laughable. I mean, personally, I think the notion that AOC is a communist is debatable, but there's a big gap between her and Joe Biden. And, Joe Biden has been center left his entire career. And since he's been president, he has stood up to the left wing of his party on a number of issues. Also, the Cold War has been over for, I'm doing quick math there, for almost 30 years. And I thought once the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union receded into history, this would stop. But now the reason Joe Biden's a communist is because he's reputedly soft on China. We could have a long discussion about that. But the claim that Joe Biden's a communist is just ridiculous.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. That's all we have time for tonight. Thanks to our guests, and thanks to you for listening to The Square Circle. Be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave us a 5-star review. I'm Heather Godwin, and we'll see you next week.